Hey there, listeners. This is Dru Johnson from the Biblical Mind podcast. I'm also the director of the Center for Hebraic Thought, and it's that time of year where we shamelessly come to you and ask for money. The Center for Hebraic Thought actually does a lot of things. You may only know us through this podcast, but we also publish weekly articles from scholars and experts translating the fruits of biblical thinking into all kinds of practical issues for daily life. We put on events, we do workshops training pastors, pastoral staff, church leaders on how to think alongside the biblical authors. We create videos, we have this podcast. And the truth is, we need your help to do these things. If every one of you listeners just gave $100, we could actually cover our costs for the year. Obviously, not everybody can give $100, but that's what it would take to cover our operating costs for the year. Now, that might sound like a lot of money, but we actually do a lot of things between the Center for Hebraic Thought and the Biblical Mind. We have a lot of people that work on every episode, from the graphic artist to the person who creates the show notes, to the audio editor, to the person who schedules the interviews with all of our special guests. It takes a village to raise a podcast episode, much less a weekly episode. And so we're asking you at the end of this year, you can give to us. It's tax deductible, which means the bigger the gift, the bigger the tax deduction. You can go to hebraicthought.org/give. That's Hebraic, Hebraic, thought.org/give. And you can give a donation of any size, from $1 to $100 and beyond. You can give us a horse, a sheep, a bag of hay, a used car. No, I'm just kidding. We actually prefer cash, but you can do that at hebraicthought.org/give. And now to our episode.
This is the Biblical Mind podcast, produced by the Center for Hebraic Thought. Honest 5-star reviews help others find this podcast. Visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org for articles and videos that explore the deep structures of Scripture.
A lot of folks, we kind of just glaze over when we read, and people, places, and things become like ornamental to the story as opposed to intentional. And I think if we start paying attention to some of the people, places, and things, people might get really interested in something that feels random, but it's those rabbit trails that keep our connection with God fresh, because we're going back to the text going, wait a minute, I didn't notice that the first time. Oh, wait. That happens in another place, or that's like Jacob's story, or, all these things start firing in your brain. And then you realize once again, wow, there has to be a God. Like this cannot be by accident. This has to be one unified, cohesive story. And I want to look at it again that way.
I mean, I find that this rereading and rereading, it begins to light up like a Christmas tree. Especially when you follow certain themes. I like how you said it seems like some random things that are thrown in there. Then you say, "Oh no, contraremo frere, that's not random." Wait, hold that one in your mind, because it's going to come up again. Yeah, and I think that gets people excited about the biblical text when you can help them see those things as well. I'm reading right now Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book. I don't know if you've ever read it. It's a classic that I had never read, and so I finally picked it up and started reading it. And he talks about pre-reading or screening, like that it's those facts, what you call the ornamental aspects of the text, that they're not ornamental at all. But it's a lot of that throws people off. Like, I feel like once you've hit the fourth place name that they've never heard of and they don't know where it's at, people just kind of start skipping or skimming. So do you have any process that when you teach people that you help them get some of those facts under their belt to help them not trip up so much on the little things?
Yeah, I mean, a good example right now, Drew, would be my son Caleb is 9, and he is just the kindest human being on the planet. And he's the Spirit of God. It has to be the Spirit because it hasn't been anything else. Has really drawn him to the scriptures, and he is into the book of Acts because a lot of people go to jail. That's what he told me. Total boy, he's like, Mommy, tons of people go to jail in this book.
Is awesome.
And I'm like, yeah, and they also get free. Let's talk about free, like what Jesus does and the power of his Spirit. But I will say that getting him into Acts chapter 14 or 13, where he's like, Derby, Iconium, like who's Barnabas? So things like that. I think sometimes kids show us exactly what happens to us in adult life. So what he's tripping over verbally, I can read and spell and probably say, but I don't care.
Right.
So at least he's still at the point now where he has enough interest to go, is this a person? Is this a place?
Right.
Where is this? And at his age, Drew, what I'm encouraging him with is, this is a place far away that's hard to pronounce, but it was really important because it's a journey, right? And it's just like us going on our trip to Colorado and the route we took and how important it was on timing. And so, but I think once we get to the adult level, we're like, yada, yada, yada. It has a place, people. I don't know who they were. Probably doesn't matter. And then we find out later, oh, wait, that was like the key to unlocking this entire message. So I think I had written down before we got on the call today just to talk about how my son has really impacted how I read. And it's now become a chicken and the egg. I don't know who's influencing more now, because he'll say things like, a lot of people go to jail in this book. And I'm like, you're exactly right. What if we, so the other day I said, let's look up every story in this that has them go to jail. And let's just compare the stories. What happens in some of them? What happens? What did you learn about God? And so I think when we do those same things and have that childlike interest and curiosity, it can really, really propel us to get closer to God.
Yeah, children, it's also when you teach your children how to spell and to write, that's when you finally realize that you actually don't know why words are spelled the way they are. Because you start out, we're going, oh, it's an IGHT word. It's one of those. And then after you hit the 4th violation of the rule, you're like, I don't know why it's spelled that way. Just memorize it. That's what we had to do, right?
Yeah, but I think Caleb has told me, Mommy, you wouldn't do really good in 4th grade. We had to do long division, and I was like, ooh, wow, I got to dig for that. Let's watch a YouTube video.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's one of the beauties of having children is you actually get to relearn what you learned a long time ago, right? But, in my Bible classes in college that I teach, I have non-Christians in there all the time, and I try to empower them and say, like, look, if you've never read this text before, you're actually going to have some of the best questions in the room because you're going to see it with the freshest eyes, and you're going to be asking honest questions like, why did they do that? Why does God not know what's going on here? Why, and so I found that actually reading the biblical text with non-believers or people who've never really encountered the text before helps me to see it with fresh eyes as well and ask some of the right questions. And who's influencing whom becomes lost in the mix at some point. So how did you get interested in all of it? How did you end up being a Bible storyteller and writer, and I'm going to use the word carefully, influencer on this front?
Influencer. When I was 16, I came to faith, and I remember going to the youth pastor at our church at the time and telling him, I am not a youth group girl. I'm not going to camp. I don't want to play no games. I do not know the difference between Moses and Abraham. Like, where does the sister start if they don't know anything about the Bible and want to pursue Christ? And he said, we have a really Southern lady with really Southern hair. She teaches a Sunday school class here. It's for adults only. It's really big. It's big enough to where you could slip into the back and no one would notice you. And it was Beth Moore's Sunday school class at Houston's First Baptist Church. And there were 600 adults in there every Sunday morning. So as a 17-year-old, I was slipping into the back and listening to her. I didn't know who she was. It really didn't matter to me. But she had these front and back handouts that she would give and fill in the blanks and then cite all of her sources. And I would take those home, Drew, and be like, this is so interesting. And then I would go and look up the books she was referencing. And by the time I went to college, being under her teaching for 2 years, I just saw someone who was really funny, telling personal stories. So that kept me engaged. And then I also really enjoyed the way she enjoyed the Bible. I was like, what version is she reading? She is very enthusiastic about this. And so it really goes back to that. I was telling someone 2 nights ago on my front patio, I'm doing the same thing that I was doing 25 years ago in her class. It's like I keep my notes, hole punch them or put them somewhere in my digital assets, and reread them and study them. And I'm still doing that all these years later.
Yeah, that enthusiasm for the biblical text. And of course, what I found, because I became a Christian when I was about 19, and again read the biblical text for the very first time, with same situation. And and I would hear people who would talk about the biblical text, but then I would go read it and go, okay, they seem to be seeing things in here that I'm not noticing. And it's the enthusiasm comes because you're usually seeing how it's all connected, and you're bringing Deuteronomy into your discussion of Paul's epistles. And, you can see, that fine line between, yarn and note cards on a cork board and, conspiracy thinking, and actually seeing real patterns that are in there.
Yeah.
But it's an infectious enthusiasm, though.
It really is. And it's lasted all this while. And I think that I pray for holy curiosity a lot in my personal life. I pray it for all the people that I'm privileged to serve in any capacity, just that something that I say or write would inspire holy curiosity, that takes someone back to a story and goes, I'm not sure she's right about that, or that's a very interesting reading, or I've never thought about it that way, or where did this come from? And I think things leveled up for me after I graduated from Dallas Seminary, getting into intertextuality and finding a whole field of study that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
I found out way too late. And then that's when I thought, this is really what I want to learn from the folks who are specializing in this, and just read a ton of books. Riken has been really helpful, and Richard B. Hayes and Richard Bauckham, and a lot of those guys have influenced a lot of what I'm doing. Richards.
So talk about that for a second, going to Dallas Seminary, because I think, because I was a pastor in a church that had a lot of older folks, people in 60s, 70s, 80s, and they had like inductive Bible study. I learned so much from them about the Bible. They knew the Bible inside and out, and would very politely shame me about things I didn't understand when I just preached on them. And they would, they would show me like where I'd made a mistake in the politest way possible sometimes. But also what I've come to realize is they had a very factitional knowledge of Scripture, and didn't always have the kind of like long, broad story of Scripture and plugged in. So what was your experience at Dallas, which is really known for teaching people on how to get into the nitty gritty of Scripture? And then is that what left you hankering for the kind of more literary views, or how did that story work out for you?
Yeah, I think that they really cultivate inquisitive Bible readers. So I asked a ton of questions of the text. I'm not sure I let the text ask a lot of questions of me, and I'm still learning how to do that. And then I felt as though maybe reading the Bible inspirationally, meaning, wow, this word was for me and I needed this today, and this is just what I needed to hear. That definitely wasn't something I experienced personally when I was there. But I do feel like what I've fallen into is imaginative reading, where I'm trying to put myself in the story, not as if I'm a part of the story, but if I were there, what would it feel like, smell like? What happened next? What did their body language say? How did this play out in their relationship later? Did they ever talk again? So I think that it's just how my brain works to a fault, and maybe sometimes to a strength. What is happening in this story, and how does this story connect, and why was it placed there? So I still am using all those inquisitive tools they taught me, and I'm so grateful. And I think I felt some more freedom to go, I just don't know. And it might be fun to imagine and to think about how that might impact our interpretation. And it made me a little bit more free and loose to say, I'm not really sure.
Right.
And there could be a couple different ways of looking at this. We may not find out until we get to glory. I feel pretty comfortable saying this might be it. And if it is, here's how we need to think about it and apply it to our own lives, as opposed to a more rigid view of there's really only one correct interpretation. And I'm like, maybe, I hope, but I hope you're the one who got it right. So that the one way that's right, I've learned, because what if we're wrong? So I think that there is something really beneficial to get all three types of readers involved in a conversation when we're studying, so that we can see things from different angles.
Well, I can tell you right now, when you're teaching undergraduates a Bible, the one thing they hate to hear a professor say is like, yeah, I don't really know. Or I used to think that, but I don't really know anymore. I'm still thinking about it, right? And they really want you to have the answer, Johnny, on the spot. Technically, we're getting paid to know things. But actually, I think we're getting paid to transform people. So, so I wonder, as you developed your thinking of Scripture, because I'm sure I'm just gonna guess that as you started communicating what you were learning from Scripture, people were probably saying things to you like, I've never really heard anybody talk about these passages that way. So what do you think? We don't have to point fingers at the church, because everybody's trying their best in many ways. But what do you think was missing in the traditional Bible studies that you were encountering? Of course, you came through Beth Moore, so she's doing kind of her own. She's doing her own innovative thing as well. But what do you see as missing in some of those old school Bible studies?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to throw any shade toward them, because it was so pivotal in my own personal life. So it's really helped me. I would just say I needed a more well-rounded view. And I would say one of the hangups is when we study by book, chapter, or verse, which is beautiful, and I love it, and I do it, so I'm not putting it down. If that is the only way, that is why a lot of people think of the Bible as a roadmap or a checklist or I'm trying to think of the other examples that make me feel a little. Yeah, a manual. That's right. Yeah, an instruction manual. It makes me feel a little uncomfortable, because there are propositional truths that should be instructive that we should follow. So I don't want to say, no, don't do it that way. But I also don't want to lose the fact that God is an artistic genius. Like, this is a literary masterpiece. Who can write something over thousands of years by all these different authors and make it cohesive? How? Right. I mean, sometimes I think we miss just appreciating the artistic brilliance, because we're so zoned in on something that we need to zoom out a little bit and go, okay, why is Jacob important in how does he show up even in the New Testament? So I think some of that intertextuality has really helped me step back and go, I've never thought about that all the trees are connected, or that all the mountains are connected, or that the imagery could mean something to the story.
Yeah, I think that because I read the Old Testament every semester with my students, and so obviously I've learned things every semester alongside them, or they point out things that I've never noticed. I make bigger claims, like it's the greatest literary masterpiece in the history of humanity, certainly in ancient times. Better than anything Homer wrote. I mean, Homer, like, it's all impressive, but it's doing things that other texts can't do, because it's using various authors in various ways. And it's not like blandly interesting. It's like
riveting.
Riveting. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. It's like mind blowing every time. And you go, what?
Yeah.
I've read this 10 billion times. It was in my reading plan for 5 years. How did I miss this one little detail? And, for me, I was reading Jonathan Pennington's Sermon on the Mount and Human Flourishing the second time. And you heard me tell him when I got to meet him last year at
that's right. Yeah.
I was like, what? I loved your book. I've read it twice. But I remember, because I keep dates on everything that I read. It was December of 2020, and I was in Broken Bow reading his book. And by the time you get to like
Broken Bow, Oklahoma?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know. It's only 4 hours away from Dallas. I'm sorry.
I'm from Tulsa, so I know Broken Arrow and Broken Bow and Nowata.
Yeah, it's where people go to vacation when they're just trying to get out of Dallas.
That must be, that's new on me. Okay, sorry, the total sidetrack. So you remember that you were reading it December of 2020.
Yeah, and he was the first person to point out to me that mountains are a symbol in the scriptures. And he just very casually, he said, look at the mountains in Matthew. Jesus is tempted on a mountain and transfigured on a mountain, gives his most famous sermon on a mountain, and he commissions his disciples on a mountain. And I remember being like, what? I didn't see this the first time I read this commentary. And look at it, Drew. I mean, like every single thing is underlined and circled. But when he said there is an implicit figural connection between these mountains, he was focused on Moses and Jesus, but that moment set me on a course for the next 18 months to look up every single mountain in the Bible and to go, what? I didn't even notice that there are so many of them in there. Yeah. So I think that can really help folks follow a rabbit trail through the scriptures. And maybe that's missing in our work, our church work. Maybe that's missing in the way that we teach our students about the Bible, is making connections outside of a particular verse, chapter, or book.
Yeah. I remember vividly a friend of mine who did my PhD with him. I saw him at SBL, Society of Biblical Literature, I don't know, a few years ago. I said, what are you working on? He goes, I'm working on a book on trees in the Bible. And my first reaction was, well, that sounds horribly boring.
No, I read. Who is it? Who wrote it?
Well, he hasn't finished it yet. I have a feeling it will be like the book on trees when he puts it out, because he's that kind of a guy. But and other people have written on it as well. But he just very quickly gave me the elevator pitch for trees, and I was like, oh, why? How could I foolishly think trees didn't have this kind of central importance? And I noticed you have a whole book on the storyline of trees throughout Scripture as well.
Bible Project did like a 6-part video series at the beginning of this year that really influenced part of my writing. But yeah, I mean, I read a ton of books and monographs on trees and about nerded out until my head exploded.
Yeah. And then again, as soon as he gave me the elevator pitch, now as I'm reading scripture, I can't help but see trees everywhere, right? And the use of branches and all kinds of tree metaphors. Yeah.
Yeah. What's been really cool, Drew, is when I came to my family and said, hey, look, I'm thinking about saying yes to this opportunity to write this 6 Bible study series called The Storyline. It's all about mountains and valleys in the Bible and trees and stones and archetypes of characters. And I essentially was trying to recruit my 8-year-old and say, Mommy's going to be busy on Saturdays a lot. Right. The door is going to be closed. This is going to be hard on the whole family. We have to be really bought in. And he left the table. He was like, awesome. That sounds cool. And he left the table and he came back, Drew, with a Post-it note that I have that's framed. And he was like, you should totally do boats. Boats are everywhere. Noah was on a boat, and then Jesus was on a boat, and then Peter had that boat situation. And Jonah. I was like, we should do boats. So I think that once you see one thing, and now he's the kind of kid who nudges me in church when we read a psalm that has the word mountain in it, and now if we sing a song about God on the mountain or meeting us in the valley, he's nudging me. And I'm like, that's the point, I think, of God's artistic brilliance is when I teach 4th and 5th graders Sunday school class at our church. And I was talking about Jacob and Jesus and all these parallels. And she was like, why did God do it this way? And I was like, so that we would notice. It's so cool. Right. So that's the answer, so that we would notice and we would pay attention. But I think, again, I don't talk about my kid a whole lot on podcasts, but he really has helped shape and vision the studies because he gets it.
I think he loves you and has a plan for your life. Probably, I mean, I don't know why you haven't brought up the book on jail yet, but it seems like the jails are harder in the Old Testament than New Testament. There's a lot more jails going on, although there was a big jail culture in the Old Testament, just not in Israel. Yeah, and I think, again, once you take that single thread, well, here, let me back up and ask this question, because I did some of my doctoral work on the Transfiguration in Mark's Gospel, there is a cheat when you're reading the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, and you're reading the Gospels, like you can see they're using very clearly the Mount Sinai language from the Septuagint and these mountaintop moments, even this particular language of the clouds opening and departing and stuff. So it's a little bit of a cheat, but you can figure this all out in the English as well, or any translation. But back up a little bit, because this is the part that I think a lot of people conflate too quickly. There's the actual event, right, where things happen on a mountain. The people were actually at the foot of Mount Sinai, I believe, and they were actually seeing these things unfold and having real reactions to them, so that every mountain, those people and their children, because those people all died in the wilderness, but from that point on, mountains are kind of scarred into their psyche and terrifying in wonderful ways, right? It's the place where God made a treaty with us, but also it's kind of where we sealed our doom. And then that's the thing that happened. And then there's the story about the mountains as well, right? And so I wonder what you think about that interplay between, like I love John's addendum. There are many things that Jesus did that I could have written about, but I wrote these things, in this order. He doesn't say in this order, but I wrote these things and put them in this kind of package so that you might trust in Jesus. So do you think that, let's see, how can I put this politely? Maybe the biblical authors are just like, they just love mountains. Or, I mean, and this is a real issue because, I'm sure you've been to Israel, but like mountains and valleys is a central hill country thing, which means you're in Judah and Samaria, but not necessarily in Jezreel. And I mean, even Har Megiddo, or what's called Armageddon later, it's a city. It's in the shape of a mountain because it's been destroyed so many times. Right. But it's not, but yeah, is there like a mountain shaped culture? Mountophilic. I don't know what you would call these people.
It's awesome.
I'm
adding it to the dictionary.
Yeah. What do you suppose? And feel free to just speculate wildly here. You're the one who's thought about it as to why mountains are playing such an important role. Because the other question is is God using mountains in this special way, or is it just that the people who are writing these texts are mountophilic? We should come up with a better name than that.
Mountophilic. I love it so much.
Got to find a Latin name for it.
Well, I've never thought about this question. I think the answer would be both and. Okay. I do think that God intentionally went, the perfect place for this would be a mountain because of everything I've done before.
God, like the event coordinator, he's he's like, what would really make this moment pop?
Seriously,
let's put it on a mountain.
But I kind of do though, Drew. I'm not going to lie.
I'm with you.
The way that we develop stories in our own lives or movie franchises we really get into, I think of someone like Star Wars, where something happens in movie 7 or 8 and you're like, no way, that is a throwback to movie 1. And if you knew that, people really nerd out about that kind of stuff, but it makes the franchise so fun for those who can see the echoes and see the connections between all the different movies. And it feels so intentional by the directors, the people who are putting the story together. I do think that is present in the text. I do think he's really intentional. And I also think that the authors were more familiar with all of these symbols in a symbolic driven world that maybe we don't get because it's not so much for us. And so I think it was probably both and I think it would help us to look at each story as a unit and to study it the way I learned to go really deep and zone in and to see what it means for those people, but also to take a wider view and go, does it connect to anything else? And why would it? And should I learn anything from these connections?
Yeah, and even lots of people have made the connections between mountains and that mountains allow you to get closer to the heavens. And of course, in places like the Euphrates, where there are no mountains, they build mountains, they build ziggurats. And in the Nile, there are no mountains, so they build mountains and pyramids in some ways, which, maybe that's what's going on. It's certainly something like that is going on. But have you been to Jerusalem? I assume. Have you actually gotten to go up on the Temple Mount itself? So one of the things I always point out to my students is when you're on the Temple Mount, like on what is now the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque up there, you can actually spin around in 360 degrees, and you'll instantly notice that technically you're on, Mount Zion, on the old city of Jerusalem, or Mount Moriah. I'm sorry. But you're also surrounded by a bunch of mountains that are all taller than, like 3 times taller than. It's actually a short hill surrounded by a bunch of taller hills. And I wonder if you think that there's, like, I always think, like, is that a critique of the high places? Like, because Solomon builds altars on the next hill over, on the Mount of Olives,
yeah, he does,
for human sacrifice to Moloch, right? So do you think Jerusalem itself, the fact that it's on a mountain, but it's a wee mountain amongst big mountains, I'm using the word mountain very liberally here, that actually is meant to instruct as well? Or do you think that's just an accident of history?
I don't know. I have to think on that. I really don't know. I think that for many of the writers and the editors, as they were putting these stories together, I think they probably noticed what God was intending to do while also enjoying it and drawing it out. And I think that both were probably at play, that they thought, oh, yeah, we could kind of tie this into everything else. And I don't want to make too much of the geographical locations, but then I also don't want to underappreciate their symbolism. So I don't know. I'd have to give it some thought, Drew. That's a really good question.
I like that phrase. They were enjoying it and drawing it out, right? That it just shows their appreciation to the location. I think that's what this book series that you've given us is. It's appreciating that this happened in a real time and space with real people who did go down in valleys and had to, like, come up on the other side, had to live that life. I even think of communion as locked into this location as well, because, like, you don't grow grapes everywhere in the world, right? Bread is everywhere, but grapes are, and wine is uniquely tied to this region of the world as well. What if you could have added? So I see you have mountains, valleys, sticks, and stones. Are there other ones that aren't besides these that aren't?
Yeah, there's 2 more: sinners and saints.
Oh,
so I focus on some character types in the New Testament.
You can't just drop us. Wait, is that one each? One sinners and one saints?
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
wow.
really fun.
Okay.
So sinners is about folks who may have been viewed socially as sinners, air quotes, and that evidence a lot of faith in God and kind of stand out in their story of, wow, even the Samaritan got it, or wow, the Canaanite, mom, wow, she seems to really be getting it. Oh, wow, tax collectors repenting. Wow, wasn't expecting that. And then saints is about religious leaders that sometimes do doofus things.
Yeah.
That you think, man, I thought they would have gotten it, and not to say that they didn't get it eventually, but that one was really fun to look at how I think God intentionally included some really layered characters that are very complex because we are complex. But oftentimes when I read the New Testament, I think, villain, bad guy.
Right.
And again, it's my son teaching me. He asked, is he a good guy or a bad guy? Is Anakin Skywalker a good guy or a bad guy? I'm like, well, that's a really good question. Right. Because Peppa the Pig, all those children programming, they're teaching kids that there's good people and there's bad people. And now we're having to do the hard work when we come to the scriptures to go, okay, Nicodemus isn't all bad. Judas is a really complex character. So that's what I covered.
Not all bad. Some of them
not
good.
All bad.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I think, like, okay, children we teach, and as they used to say or they say in the UK, goodies and baddies. And then the only other place you hear that kind of language is in the military. Like, so when you're in a combat zone, good guys, bad guys, like, you just got to make who you're going to shoot at, basically, distinctions.
Yeah.
And the police, good guys and bad guys.
Yep.
So it's funny, like, these are very extreme situations. Children who just need to be able to, like, stay safe. And then it's really safety issue kind of things. And yet we drag that mentality to the text. And I always say, when I read the Gospels for the first time, Jesus is the roundest character in literary history, because I could never guess what that guy was going to, like, every time someone came up to him, I was just like, here we go.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember getting to the end of like 2 after the second gospel going like, I still cannot guess what this guy's going to do.
Yep.
Which makes them so fun and riveting. And now that I know the Torah pretty well, I'm like, I wouldn't have been able to guess it, but it's so Torah what he's doing, right?
Yeah.
And how he
that's such a Jesus juke right there. I love it.
Yeah.
It just, you're like, you really, Kat, you need to study the Torah a whole lot more.
Well, it just, it illuminates so much of what's going on in Jesus' teaching and
Mm-hmm.
honestly his action as well. So if these books that you're producing, if they could do one thing, what's the main goal?
We talked about it right before we hit record. I mean, the win and the prayer that I've been praying for 18 months, I get emotional every time, Dru, is that this could be holy curiosity for someone, that someone would pick it up, even if they disagree with it, and go, I need to go back and reread. And the goal would be if someone reads about mountains and then every single time they sing about it in church, they read about it in the Psalms, they find a story with the word mountain, they find themselves climbing a mountain, walking a mountain, looking at a mountain, every single time would be a connection point back to God and to go, wow, that is awesome. His storytelling is so interesting. I want to get back in. So that's really the win. And I think, and I hope that it may be a new way for people to look at the scriptures. And I think it's for a lot of ministry leaders could be some resources to support the work in the local church, to support the work with other leaders that they're developing, to say, let's follow a rabbit trail for a second and get creative and start imagining what might be a part of these stories. I think it will really broaden people's perspective, and that's how I'm praying. Yeah.
Well, I think we just have to be deadly honest here that the American imagination doesn't really want to do the due diligence of reading scripture closely and being entranced by it. They really, they're happy to have a caricature. Even Christians, they're happy to have a caricature of all of these things theologically and otherwise, and to move on down the road. So I think, if nothing else, this creates a sense of excitement of, there's all this stuff in here I never realized was tied together in these ways. And I think once you have those realizations, then you realize, there's even more. And this is kind of nonstop. Well, Kat Armstrong, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom in guiding us through this form of Bible study.
Thanks, Dru. Appreciate it. Good talking with you.
You've been listening to the Biblical Mind podcast, exploring the deep structures of Christian scripture. For more, visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org. Subscribe to this podcast at all the usual places so you never miss an episode.